right. So again, I'm Eric Vansel,
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
and we are your hosts for part two of this show. It was an unscheduled part two. I really sincerely hope that we actually get the audience that we had back. I just had to recreate a new stream because unfortunately my computer just crashed like right in the middle when we were doing the first part. So that was like 10 minutes. But the point is, though, in talking about this whole uh, cancellation of the Star Wars movie, right? Because this is actually big. This is something that has happened since. Well, let's put it this way: it was being threatened for a while, right? We talked about how the Star Wars franchise was starting to show some cracks. We talked about how the fan base was starting to lose its goodwill. You know,
Mhm.
we started to actually see some signs. But this is the first time that I think that you're really starting to see real evidence of the fact that this is happening because they've gone through stuff like this before. You know, they lost a writer, they had a few shakeups behind the scenes or whatever, but usually it didn't derail the whole movie. Now, I'm going to actually put something out there and I want, your thoughts on this. I actually don't think it's a bad move because what used to happen is that Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm would end up just moving forward, right? They fire Lord and Miller like 80% into Solo. Whatever, we'll just get somebody else to write it, or to direct it. We got Ron Howard in there. And they just push forward, did a bunch of reshoots or whatever. This time, I actually think that they're doing a thing where it's like, you know what? We're actually having some issues. Let's just take it off of the schedule. Let's just regroup. Let's not, push forward right now. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a sign that they're in trouble and that there's, that this is not the once mighty franchise that it was, but I actually think that the response to it might be the smart thing in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well be that. The problem that it's the optics though, and
Mm.
that this they're having problems left and right. It goes from okay, we got these directors. Okay, Colin Trevorrow is directing, you know, the third movie in the trilogy. Now he's not. Now JJ has to run in and try to piece it together. Now, uh, Lord and Miller are fired. Now, Ron Howard has to come in and finish the movie. Oh, the Acolyte completely sucks. We're not doing that for a season two. Um, it's just like one, oh, we're gonna do this project. Oh no, we're pushing it back until this date. Oh no, it's just it keeps happening.
Yeah.
And maybe, because I'm not in Hollywood, maybe this type of thing happens all the time. But for whatever reason, like Star Wars, this keeps coming out that it's happening. So if it is a common thing in Hollywood, okay, then so be it. Maybe I'm just, I'm tripping for nothing. But if not, which I don't believe I am,
No, I don't think you are.
this is and for once I will side with David on this. It's like you don't hear about this with Fast and the Furious. You don't hear about this with other like project. I mean, your franchises that are like, okay, we're continuously dropping films. So my question is, what the heck is happening over at Lucasfilm slash Disney?
Well,
And that's the part that's really disconcerting as a fan is because you're looking at the leadership over there and you're just like get your crap together, like you know and that's the culture of Lucasfilm has completely changed. Eric, you and I, we live in the Detroit metro area, so we're Lions fans, and for the longest time, Detroit Lions have been the laughing stock of football.
mm-hmm.
We even had a 0-16 season once, right? And everybody kept wondering, like, okay, what is it going to take for Detroit to actually get back and be competitive with all these other NFL teams? What is it going to take? And they started, they brought in some new fresh blood, Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes. The leadership changed. And it got to a point where it's like, okay, now they started slowly and progressively started making changes to now, as of today, we're a 9-1 football team. Imagine that. And we went out and got good players, and we're rocking and rolling. And that's the thing I'm worried about with Star Wars. It's like, okay, you got someone good like Dave Filoni, you got a great director in Jon Favreau, who's been proven and they've been tested in various forms of content creation. So my thing is like, what the biggest thing that we haven't seen is the leadership. Kathleen Kennedy is still running Lucasfilm,
Yep.
and it's something has to change with her. Either put her in a different position somewhere where she can't affect things as much, and get, like Bob Iger. I know he left and came back. I don't know what they're saying, but it just looks like a disaster because they can't seem to keep writers. They can't seem to keep directors. They can't seem to keep people happy. John Boyega's irritated. You got all this stuff where they don't feel supported. You got Gina Carano. All this stuff is going on. And then you got other franchises making mockeries of you because it's like, oh, Kathleen Kennedy is ruining Disney and Marvel films. So you got South Park making a whole spoof about her and what she's doing to a franchise. That should, I mean, what more is it going to take for them to realize, like, okay, maybe she's really the problem?
Yeah, I really don't understand why they haven't really isolated it down to that cause. Because if you really think about it, this is a person that, okay, again, she came out of the gate, box office success. You couldn't argue it. The problem is that the fans had issues with what she was doing, but yet people were coming in droves, right? I mean, you can't argue when, you're making more money than anything previous. Now, of course, we can argue that when you adjust for inflation and everything, the original trilogy still did like way better, broke ground. And that's the other problem too, is that, you compare it to the Fast and the Furious. But I think the biggest problem with that is that when you look at a franchise like that, granted, it's a long-running franchise, but at the same time, it's not the pop culture phenomenon that Star Wars is, that came from the mind of one person that created a universe that resonated with people all around the world. And, Star Wars is kind of its own unique thing. It's the reason why we're doing a show on this.
Sure.
I mean, sure, I suppose, because I remember there's still that long-threatened general entertainment show that I promise one day we will do. But there were times that we actually thought, you and I remember, of doing, like, individual stuff, right? Like, maybe we do, like, a limited Cobra Kai breakdown or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where we actually do, because I remember we were thinking of keeping the head-to-head branding and then doing like head-to-head, a Cobra Kai podcast, head-to-head, a James Bond podcast, that kind of a thing. Now, they might not be as long-running as this has been. They might be like a particular amount of episodes, and then, we move on to something else. But the point is that nothing really generates sustained discussion quite the same way Star Wars does. That's why there's so many shows on YouTube. That's why whenever new books are released, they tend to do well. But like I said earlier, I do think that now it's starting to show those cracks. I mean, you can't deny that it's almost like Star Wars was impervious enough to sustain extremely heavy damage without necessarily faltering. But the thing is that, unfortunately, I think under Kathleen Kennedy's leadership, it has sustained just critical damage and will continue to do so. Because you bring up, I mean, here's the funny thing. I mean, you just look at, and a lot of it is just because you have this whole ideology that Disney has that's failing. Nobody wants it. We talk about
Hmm.
the woke agenda and all that. I mean, one of the latest examples, and this is just funny to me. The actress that played Snow White, right? She just went on this whole like tirade. It's really bad. Worse than anything Gina Carano ever did. But Carano was fired. Why? Because the leadership at Disney didn't necessarily agree with Carano's point of view. Maybe didn't have as much of an issue with what's her name, Renee Ziegler or something like that. Her point of view, and it's trying to cram a lot of this stuff down, and people are like, look, we don't care. Just leave all the social ideologies out of it. Just give us good stories, like what it used to be, good escapism
Yeah.
entertainment. And they did the
Hmm.
same thing a little bit with Marvel, and then that's one part of it. And then I think the other part of it is it loses its way in the sense that stories get convoluted. They're not planning things properly like they used to. That plays, I think, a really big part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to play with, and a lot of times it feels like they're trying to play with the intelligence of the fans. They feel like, okay, we give them something like, oh, live action Snow White. Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, it would be. I wonder who they're going to get to play the dwarves. I wonder who they're going to do to get to play, this person and that person. But it's like, okay, but the story, are you going to tell the story of Snow White, or are you going to try to modernize it in such a way that it's no longer timeless?
Yep, that's
And that's
exactly
and
it
that's the
too.
thing.
That's right.
And that's
That's
the
a
thing.
great point. They modernize it so much that it's no longer timeless. What a yes.
Yeah. and that's really what's happening with a lot of different films. And um there's a lot, like we just talked about Cobra Kai, right? Now, once again, you still have the same theme from the original Karate Kid movies, right? It's
Yep.
a bully thing. It's like, okay, I'm using martial arts or karate to discover myself, who I am as a person, and overcome these challenges, especially dealing with bullies. Whether you're talking about Johnny, whether you're talking about um, uh, what's his name, Chosen, whether you're talking about oh, what's his name from
Mike Barnes.
Mike Barnes. Thank you. Yeah, it's all surrounded, or even Terry Silver, another bully, John Kreese, another bully. So as we're watching these themes throughout the entire series that they've been putting out here, it all has to deal with the bully aspect. And okay, how do you adjust to different things, and how do you find balance in the world? How do you be a bigger person? How do you become a better person? That's all the Karate Kid was really about. At its core, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they just stretched it out. And yes, they've modernized it where now they're talking about Facebook and cell phones. Of course, they didn't have that in '84 or whatever, but it's the same theme. And that's why everybody still loves Cobra Kai, or that's why people still tune into it. And yeah, you're watching these older guys that, sure, the nostalgia of seeing Johnny and Daniel running around with each other, it's like almost like a little Starsky and Hutch type thing. But you're watching these older guys like evolve as mentors now and fathers, and how are they having to adjust and getting out of their own way from how things were done back in the day, back in the '80s. Oh yeah, back in the day, I'll just kick the crap out of this guy, but you can't do that anymore. You got to be politically correct. Yes. So you're dealing with certain social issues as it pertains to the actual story, to the theme of it. No, you can't kick the crap out of somebody because that's being a bully, and okay, you have to find new ways of getting the job done. That makes sense. But when you have stuff where you're just trying to shoehorn, oh, we want to put the LGBTQ plus community in here, or we want to stick women as the lead, and it's not earned. It's not like, okay, you just have it just to have it, just to say that you did it. Where's the story in that?
Well, and it becomes a thing to where, like you said, they're doing it. Or one of the things that I remember used to bother you, it was funny because I wish I can remember which character it was. They tried to change the race of a character. And, like, you just unloaded. I wish I can remember who it was.
Oh, I definitely could tell you. It's when they tried to put Idris Elba as James Bond.
Oh, that was
Just
it.
because
That was it.
yes, they wanted to make Idris Elba James Bond because he's an attractive black guy who happens to be British, and it's like, oh, wouldn't he be great as James Bond? Yeah, cool. Yeah, he could pull it off, but guess what? That's not how Ian Fleming wrote the character. Now, granted, sure, they taken some liberties because of course you had Scottish actors playing James Bond, notably. Okay, sure. However, it's their accent, and it's easier for them to do that role, and he still more or less fits the character. That's like saying, like, oh, let's make Superman a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's Superman. It's man. It's in the name.
And here's the thing that's
It's
funny.
like, why would you do that?
So, like, back then, they understood this, right? Like, basically, if they wanted to do that, they would just create a new character. Like, they wanted a Black Robin.
Yeah.
Great. They made up Tim Drake. They didn't try
Yeah.
to recast, Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson. Exactly.
Or okay, a female Superman, Supergirl.
Exactly.
People actually understood this, right? I mean, I remember it was really funny because when in the new Star Trek movies, when they made Sulu gay, like George Takei, who's actually gay in real life. In fact, he's so much so that he's an activist and all this other stuff. He actually was upset because he was like, you know what? The character wasn't written like that, and you just undid pretty much all my work. It was kind of like a slap in the face. It's like, okay, I get it. You're trying to honor me, but it's not. You're actually doing the opposite. And so when you do that in Star Wars, now, for the most part, the one thing that I will give them, so they did basically do it in such a way that if they were going to do anything extreme with the characters, they generally did it with non-established characters, right? They would just create somebody. But at the same time, again, you can look at Rey and it's just basically a rehash of Luke, which wouldn't necessarily bother me because really it's more like the rehash of the hero's journey. And I admit that it's actually, okay, let's turn it on its ear and make it a woman going through it, and let's see the differences with that. And that would be, actually, that would be great. I'd be on board with that. Because, again, I mean, I always feel, I don't know why, but I almost feel like I have to point this out every time we venture into this territory, right?
Right. I already know.
That we're not misogynistic, we're not anti-woman. As we pointed out, and we even, didn't we, I mean, okay, there was who's the hottest woman in Star Wars? That was a little misogynistic, but we also did.
I still don't think that's true, but okay.
It's. I'm talking about to other people. I'm not talking about to us.
Well, no, I mean, of course not to us, but I mean, even for other people, but that's anyway.
I mean, to female.
Anyway.
Well, actually, that's not true because even some of our female fans, like Voyager, chimed in on that one too. But the point being that it's the way that they do it, right? Because Star Wars actually has a lot of tremendously cool female characters. We talked about this. We even did, I think we did something like our top 5 or 10 female characters or something in Star Wars because there's a bunch of them.
Oh, yeah.
And this is what I hate. I always hate when you have a problem with something. It's just like the acolyte people, right? From the people who created it all the way down to some of these crazy fans or so-called fans that are like, oh, you just hate it because, whatever. You don't like women or you don't like the LGBTQ community or whatever. They try to put it that. It's like, no, we didn't like it because it was a poorly written show. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you guys just, I don't think that you understand that.
Because we've gotten to a point in society where everyone is looking for the hidden agenda. Like everything, like some people feel like, oh, and I'll just, take a moment here. It's kind of like, people will ask me, okay, you'll see African American male, and he's shot down by, a white officer. And everybody
this is good. You take this one.
Yeah. No, and the first thing everybody, wants to, look to me and say like, oh, isn't that racist or isn't this a racial issue? And my thing is like, you have to prove it that they had racial intent behind it.
Right. What's the context behind it?
What's the context behind it? You just can't see a white cop, black guy, and instantly think it's racist. And I understand from an African American perspective. I understand what we've been through. I understand all of it. So
100%. There's going to be sensitivity to it. In other words, you're going to go, we need to look at this a little closer. Like, what's really going on here? But still, yeah.
What I can say, and what I can prove at the moment is that they're a bad police officer because they use bad tactics and technique.
Yep.
That they could have handled that situation a million different ways besides taking the life. So what do I think? I think they're a bad police officer. Until there's more evidence to substantiate something more, that's the only thing I can go on. And
absolutely. Overreaction, these guys, like, they don't have the proper training, so they freak out. First thing they do is pull out their guns, start shooting,
Exactly. And
then there's
I know tons of police officers. So,
yeah. I mean, you get that, you get it's really the gamut, really. So, I mean, you have to weigh these, right? And that's the thing, that whenever somebody criticizes a show you like or something like that, I mean, again, and this is where we get into that whole subject where you're dealing with objectivity versus subjectivity, where a lot of times when we look at stuff, we're looking at it more from an objective point of view, because there's been a lot of times where we both have said, well, technically this isn't the best produced show in the world, but we love it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll say, you know what? This is a flawlessly produced thing. The cinematography was amazing. Acting was great. Blah, blah, blah. Didn't land with us. Yeah. A lot of this has happened. Let me get to a couple of these chats really quick here. We got a Twitch follower. Remember wife birthday 102393 says much love. We always love hearing from our Twitch community. That's why I want to put that up there. Ronaldo says, of course, what's up, guys? What's up, Ronaldo? Glad you found us since we had those technical issues earlier. And also says, hey, Acolyte was very cool. Why am I not surprised that...
Right.
All right. And then this is great. This is classic Ronaldo right here. He says, a Star Wars movie isn't happening anymore. And in other news, water is wet.
Right. Exactly.
But you know what? And I'm going to say this, though. Now, it's true. There have been some projects that have been talked about and then never happened. But I'm not... This kind of goes into that. You need more context. You need more... you have to dig deeper, right? Because that's not an uncommon thing in Hollywood. A lot of times, you get a lot of movies that are greenlit. They stay in development. They call it development hell, right, for a reason. But for whatever reason, they never get made. And it's not because of anything incompetent or, anything like that. However, that said, usually, and this is why I said earlier, I don't remember if I said it earlier in this part 2 or if it was before the computer went down when we originally streamed, but the problem here is that usually a lot of these inexcusable things would happen, but they would soldier on. And I brought up Solo. Lord and Miller were 80% done with the movie. Kathleen Kennedy decided she didn't like the direction, canned them, brought in Ron Howard at the last minute, and then just, it was the craziest thing, man. I mean, she just basically, I forgot how much they had to reshoot, They actually did keep some of the scenes intact, but
Hmm.
that was crazy. So my point being, they soldiered on. They soldiered on. They made it, they made it happen. This is the first time where not only do you have a movie that's announced, but it actually has a release date. And
Yeah.
of course, at first, it was like, oh, we've been shooting since April. And then it's like, well, what happened? Right? Like, what
Hmm.
happened? So you have to take these things into account. Where this is the first time I think that something that was, let's just say, more solidly scheduled, actually, they pulled the plug on it because they lost a writer, and I think they're not really sure what direction they want to go in. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to wonder, like, what are some of the rationale and reasons as to why people keep jumping ship? Like, okay, I get it. Like Ryan Johnson, they won't start. He doesn't want to start his trilogy until he's done with Knives Out. Okay,
Right. Makes
understood.
sense.
But
Yep.
then you have someone like Patty Jenkins, her Rogue Squadron thing. Okay, you showing us her hop into an X-wing. You basically start playing Top Gun over it. I mean, she gives this whole touching story about her dad was a fighter pilot and all this stuff. So it's like, okay, you really got us worked up for this Rogue Squadron movie. Then she's like, oh, okay, then I got to do Wonder Woman. Oh, when that's done, I'm gonna come back, and then nothing. Then it's back on the table. Then it's back off. Now it's back again. I mean, this is dealing with Lucasfilm. It's like dealing with a relationship that you don't know where it's going. It's like you've been dating for a while, and it's like you're cool. I like you. And now it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, what are we? Are we going to be together or are we not? And that's how we feel. I think that's how most of us feel as fans because we don't know where Lucasfilm is really going, and there's like a lack of commitment to a lot of the things that they say that they're going to do. And no different than in a real relationship, enough people start letting you down. Of course, naturally, you're going to start losing faith in them because it's like, okay, sometimes you come through for me, sometimes you don't. I don't know what I'm going to get from you. And all relationships need a certain amount of consistency in order for it to really flourish. And that's kind of the way we've been feeling as fans is that, like, okay, I don't know if I can trust you or not, Lucasfilm. You might give us a good thing like Andor or Mandalorian or Force Awakens, and then you give us like a gang of crap like Acolyte and sometimes Ahsoka or um any of these other projects, and we're just or the whole sequel trilogy practically except for the Force Awakens. So I don't know where to stand with you. And at some point, like I said before, the glitch, um, Kathleen Kennedy eventually has to give an account for this stuff. Either she's going to have to like legitimately step out of the way and let someone else run the ship. I mean, because you got talented people like Dave Filoni, John Favreau. You got good people there. I know Pablo Hidalgo's still there. I'm assuming he's still there, but they've got to clean up a whole lot of mess. And it otherwise it's like, what's the point? You might as well just shut Star Wars down and just say, you know what? Thank you for your time. Enjoy the shows that you do like that we have on Disney Plus, and we're just gonna, right off into the sunset. But because you keep giving us stuff like this, and people are just not gonna care anymore.
Well, that's the biggest problem. People aren't going to care anymore. Ronaldo points out the only movie that is actually coming out is The Mandalorian and Grogu. And yeah, we brought that up earlier
Right.
because that one obviously is the May 2026 movie. But the problem is, it's like you said, they keep announcing this stuff, then they either change it or they just say no, or, whatever the case may be. And those are the kinds of things that are, quite frankly, dangerous. you really have to stop and think about what are you doing to the fan base, because you're right. The hardcore fans are even starting to have issues. You're going to lose a lot of casual fans, and it's already happening. People
Mm-hmm.
are already saying things like, "Oh, who cares?" or "Oh, Star Wars, that, nobody cares about that anymore," or,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, it's another
That's
horrible
old.
project that's coming out," or yeah, I mean, there's all these different things that they're saying now. And in a way, I would think that's got to be painful for George Lucas, because he basically sold this thing off, and he's essentially watching his legacy just being dismantled. Now, granted, for him, the only thing that exists are the first 6 films and the Clone Wars. So in a way, he's kind of like, I don't care about any of this other stuff's glorified fan fiction anyway. The only thing that really counts is what I did. And that stuff is
Let
solid, right? The original trilogy is still held up, is
Yep.
like one of the best film franchises ever, but still, I mean, you gotta you gotta feel for the guy, probably just sitting there thinking, like, what are these people doing to what I created?
Let me ask you a question. Do you think, and I know we've talked about, um, different directors and, different people coming in, and sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out what, where the problem went wrong, or the project went wrong. As far as, was it the writing, was it the direction, who's really, was it, the administration like Kathleen? What do you think about them not doing any films unless it's directed by Favreau and Filoni? Because at least you can have somewhat of a constant, right? To see, like, okay, now it's about, we got the same guys directing it. Now we might have different writers, and we can see, like, okay, you know what? It's the writing, or is it the direction? And I think that might help, because now once again, you got different guys coming in, and women, who are trying to deliver stuff. Like, you got Deborah Chow out here, you got um Bryce Dallas Howard, you got all these different people. And maybe like on the series side, sure, you might do, I guess, different directors and stuff because it's a series. However, even though those could use some continuity as far as direction as well, but at least for the films, at least make it so, like, okay, just like how George Lucas was always pretty much the director of his films. So just make Favreau and Filoni, like, okay, you guys will always direct the films, and then you guys can get the writers who you feel will help you tell the best story that you can put out there, and then boom.
I don't know. I would flip that. I would say get writers that were fairly stable, and if you wanted to use a few different directors, because that's really the template that Lucas did. I mean, even though Kasdan technically did the script writing and stuff like that for Empire Strikes Back, I don't remember if he did it for Return of the Jedi or not, but I do know he did it for Empire. But the thing
Mhm.
is, Lucas was the one that was essentially controlling the story. He controlled the story, but he turned it over to different directors. And that formula seemed to be fine. And I think if you had a situation like that where, say, Filoni controls the story, now you could do the thing to where it is like a Filoni Favreau thing the whole way, or you can say one of those guys or both of them control the story in the general direction, and then you could bring in some other people, but it's a little bit more police, because right now with I was going to say with the sequel trilogy, but really with everything. I mean, other than Kathleen Kennedy's interference, they pretty much could go in any direction they wanted. It was almost like, hey, put your spin on a Star Wars thing. It was kind of like the theatrical version of Visions, where it's
Mhm.
like kind of come up with a story and do whatever, put your spin on it, put your style on it, which, if done correctly, could actually be pretty cool. But unfortunately, it wasn't done correctly. But I think that especially to right the ship, to reestablish things. And yeah, it would be better if somebody just controlled the story and policed the whole thing a little bit more and made it a little bit more streamlined. And then, of course, you had you could bring in other people directing it, but it's not like they could just come in and do like their own thing.
Yeah. 'Cause I think part of the problem is also when you have people writing and directing. Everybody can't. That's a skill set that everyone can't do, and especially in the Star Wars sandbox.
Yeah.
Sure, if you're doing your own, I guess if you're doing your own project, sure you might be able to do it. But when you're playing in the Star Wars universe, you can't just, even if you're coming up with your own characters, it may not have anything to do with the Skywalker saga. I still think that there's certain parameters within Star Wars and certain things that you have to know and how to hit those in order for it to land with fans.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. All right, let's see. Ronaldo's got a couple here. He says, I think there's a couple issues. One is that Kathleen Kennedy is not able to get on the same page as the people she hires. Well, that's a big one. The second
Hmm.
one is that any writer or director that comes receives too many notes and they have to change the script multiple times. And of course, there's no plan. Every director is allowed to add their own take on any timeline. And that pretty much does sum it up nicely. I mean, you do have Kathleen Kennedy micromanaging stuff, and I think that goes back to her days as a producer, which is when she was actually at her best. She's a terrible studio head, but she's a really good producer. So
Hmm.
I think she's thinking too much like a studio head and trying to micromanage everything. And then, of course, anytime. What's funny is, particularly I think in the Lord Miller situation, it's almost like it sounded like a good idea at the time, but then when they're actually doing it, that's when people are like, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. And that's the sad thing. So you do have that. And then, of course, yeah, you have every director that comes in just basically allowed to do whatever they want and mess with any era. And there doesn't seem to be a plan in place on, hey, we're going to roll out this and then this. And, you try to tweak the story because actually, people have said the same thing about the expanded universe, but the expanded universe was pretty calculated. First, they had to go to George Lucas to find out whether they could even do that story or not. Because Lucas, one, wanted to reserve the right for certain stories for him to tell. The second thing
Hmm.
is he didn't want the characters doing things in the books that he doesn't feel they would or should do. So there
Right.
was a little bit of that. And then since they used the Timothy Zahn novels as a template, and people just pretty much, they would figure out where they want to tell the story and read some of the books that were around that, and they try to honor each other's work and basically build on it rather than come in and just almost like make brand new reboots or something. So I think that those are some very, very big, if not catastrophic, issues.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just it's so irritating when you constantly have to keep seeing these blunders done over there because it really doesn't bode any confidence. And every time you think you're getting confidence to this franchise, it's like, oh, here we go again. I feel like 3PO. And um, I don't know. I just wish they would just figure it the heck out. And I don't know if it's Bob Iger has to step in or what, or even some of the investors, because that's another thing too. It's like I wonder how the investors like feel about all these different delays. It's like, okay, you guys told us you were going to give us a movie here, now you're not. Okay, as an investor, I know as an investor, I would be kind of concerned. Like, all right, you're asking for this amount of money, but if I give it to you, is it going to get shut down? What's going to happen? So, I don't
Well,
know.
fortunately, the investors invest in Disney, not necessarily Lucasfilm. So,
True.
and I mean, they generally turn a profit when they come out, generally. But I think the thing is, a lot of things are happening in Disney. The thing that does concern investors, I can tell you right now, is that their stocks have been not doing so well. And
Right.
I think it's a lot of these boneheaded decisions. So indirectly, yeah, it is affecting them. And I think that that's a big, big issue. So, I mean, the idea that they're actually removing a movie that was announced, that's really a big deal. I think that's a bigger deal than what a lot of people feel. Now, we'll have to see because obviously there's this new trilogy that's been greenlit by, a really good filmmaker. So I don't know if maybe the Rey movie is going to be absorbed into that, if he's actually coming up with a new story that has very little to do with the sequel trilogy or any of its characters, and it's just going to go in a different direction. Like, we really don't know too much about that announced trilogy. And of course, like you said, we have Rian Johnson, who still feels he's going to do his trilogy just after the Knives Out movies. Now, I will say this about, even though we've been critical of The Last Jedi, it's not like we didn't like the movie. It's just, it had issues, right? But I think the reason why Rian Johnson trilogy would be okay, because a lot of people have said, wait a second, this guy created the most divisive Star Wars movie ever, and you're going to give him 3? But you have to understand, if he's the one that's actually writing and or directing the entire trilogy, and it's not our classic characters, I think that people will have a different viewpoint on it. And I think that that's a very important distinction to make.
Yeah, it's a vital piece to the puzzle. The only thing is that one, making it feel like Star Wars. That's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're gonna do that, fine. I totally get that. But it has to feel like Star Wars. It has to um, really. I don't want to say push the envelope, but push it in enough way in a way where it's enough of a change where people are like, okay, now I'm interested in this. This is a different thing, but it still has that Star Wars vibe to it. And that's kind of a hard thing sometimes to sell. Sometimes it's kind of like making a perfect cocktail. Sometimes it's like, all right, you have to have the right measurements in there, and it's one of those James Bond things where you want to shake it or stir it because that could change the way something tastes. So I think if you look at it from that perspective, yeah, Rian Johnson could do a really good job. I mean, he's definitely a credible filmmaker. We know that. It's just a matter of, can you do Star Wars?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a definite thing, because not everybody's filmmaking style translates to Star Wars. And that's another thing you have to look at too. Unless you really want to go just far out on the idea we've always talked about different genre films, right? To where that would then take the precedence, and it just happens to be set in the Star Wars universe. If you do
Yeah,
something like that could work.
I mean, the cool thing if Rian Johnson did his thing is like if it fails, it's all on him.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing because if he's writing and directing all this, if it fails, it's like, okay, well, we just know you're not right for Star Wars. We don't have to guess, oh, is it the writers or the director or is it the actors or what is it? And that's all you do because this is your project.
Well, and it also
Unless you
depends
can
on,
prove that Kathleen Kennedy didn't screw you over.
well, either that or maybe the story was okay and his execution in however, whether it's his
Right, but
directing, whether it's the acting. Yeah, it's going to fall squarely on him. But there is the outside chance that, because sometimes it's happened too, where filmmakers will actually have a really good story and they just don't create it in a way that conveys how good the story actually was. I mean,
Yeah.
that's happened on even non-Star Wars films. Like a lot of stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah.
Or it's something like, you pitch something and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I think that's going to be really good. And then that's what we always said about Colin Trevorrow's Duel of the Fates movie. You read
Right.
the script of that thing, you're like, man, that thing would have been way better than the Rise of Skywalker. But you don't know that because, I would like to
It
think
only,
that, well,
it only
just
exists on paper.
it exists on paper, and that's why, because right, there's the execution. You have to think of that. But on the other hand, and this is where it gets, I think, to be somewhat, well, let's just say it's interesting. If somebody pitched the story of the Rise of Skywalker and you hadn't seen it, you might think it was cool. Sure, there's the cheesy elements, so you would have been like, oh, great, they're going to bring back Palpatine, that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But just the story on paper, you might have thought, hey, that's really great too. But I will say that given that, if I remember correctly, I think that was actually in script form. I don't think it was like an outline thing. I think it was actually the script to Duel of the Fates.
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, that the story's good, the writing's good. Now it comes on the directing and the acting and the blocking and all that stuff and cinematography. That would be where that could have gotten messed up. But it did pass the first couple of hurdles, where I'm not entirely sure that if we had never seen The Rise of Skywalker, if we just read it, we might have still been like, I don't know. That might not be the direction they want to go in. And then Ronaldo says, yes, there is a script. And yeah, I remember we actually did a show on it like a long time ago when the thing was first released. I remember we actually broke down the script, but I couldn't remember. So thanks for clarifying that. I couldn't remember if it was just a really detailed outline or if it was a script. So it was a script. And I do remember it was really dark and it was really good. But again, there's no guarantee that, you do these things and it's going to come out well. Because like you said, there's a lot that can happen between turning in a script and saying, yay, everything's great, between that and then seeing the final cut of the film.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess we're just going to have to, like everything else, wait and see. It's going to be... So the thing is, and this is what I want to know from you guys, is what do you think of this? Do you think that the movie's ever going to come out? I'll put a poll up on this, of course, but let us know in the comments. Still have about 30 seconds to let us know on the live show whether you think that this is actually going to be rescheduled or absorbed into the new Star Wars trilogy, or is this thing just gonna, go the way of the dodo and just never see the light of day, much like what I'm afraid of Rogue Squadron being. Oh no, this is a nice thing. Star Wars Order says, hello, I'm new to the channel and I think the channel is cool. Well, we like you.
That.
Yeah. We definitely appreciate that. Because again, this whole channel is based on a group of people coming together and talking about Star Wars as if you were just one of our friends. So we're trying to build a community around that. Instead of being the typical Star Wars channel that's just given a one-sided opinion or, just giving a bunch of news or whatever it is. So, hopefully you hit the subscribe and like button while you're watching. Ronaldo says, I think it'll be rescheduled. We will see at least one movie with Rey. I would venture to say that's probably true. I don't think... Look, they went to great lengths to get Daisy Ridley back. According to her, the script that she read, she said was great. It was fantastic, and it actually drew her back into the franchise. So, say what you will, but she wasn't really planning on coming back so soon. When the whole thing wrapped with The Rise of Skywalker, she was like, yeah, maybe I'll revisit the character in 10, 15 years or whatever. Which is funny because it's 15 years that it actually takes place after The Rise of Skywalker. But she was talking like real time. Well, she's back within like, how long has it been? It's been a minute, actually. It's been like, wow. It's been almost 10 years. Or wait. Yo, you're right. 6 years.
6?
Almost 6. It's actually 5.
Yeah.
It's coming up on 5. Rise of Skywalker came in 2019. Star Wars Order says, I don't really want a Rey movie, but if we're going to get them, I hope it's good at least. Yeah, I know.
I hear you on that one.
That's what I hope. I actually hope that it redeems the sequel trilogy in some ways. Because they actually have a chance to take what was wrong with the sequel trilogy and pretty much right the wrongs. And I think that if they do that, and they do that successfully, especially even though this movie has been talked about as a standalone movie, if they actually continue on and maybe make a few more standalone Rey movies, or even if they just make the one, if they do it well, I think that it could change people's attitude towards those characters, because it wasn't the actor's fault that made these things. A lot of it was just either the writing or, just like in the case of Rey, it's like, okay, they made her too overpowered too quickly, and kind of like you pointed out earlier in the show, she didn't really earn it. There was no real explanation. I mean, sure, they came up with the Palpatine angle, but even then, I mean, Luke is like pretty much the grandson of the Force, and even he had to go through some, like, he didn't just get this stuff like right out the gate. I mean, you got to work a little bit for it at least. So we'll just have to see, where that's going and where it's coming. And of course, as stuff filters in, we will let you know. The next time we're on, I don't know if we're going to have a show tomorrow. We may or may not. Just watch and see. But probably the next show that we're going to do, if it's tomorrow or if it's next Sunday, it'll probably be Andor Season 2 updates. And then, of course, don't forget, coming up in just a week from Wednesday, we have our annual Thanksgiving, like night before Thanksgiving show that we do. So that's going to be fun. Still not really sure what we could do. One of the things while you and I were talking about this tonight, I actually was thinking maybe you sort of hit on it earlier, but maybe we use that show to talk about who we think would be the best successor to Kathleen Kennedy should she ever step down. That might be a nice, intriguing discussion. We don't know, like, for this year, Dave was a little iffy. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it with us or not, because as you guys know, if you've been watching the show for a while, every year, the night before Thanksgiving, we bring our friend Dave Cossey in, and he chats with us, and we have kind of a little round table. Star Wars Order asks, how do you guys feel about Skeleton Crew? It's funny you ask. Wasn't that our last show where we reviewed the trailer? Yeah, we did a trailer reaction to the second trailer. So you might want to go back and check that if you want like a lot of details, but essentially it was a show that at first we really weren't that excited about. But after we saw the first trailer, we're like, yeah, we're on board for this. And of course, when it does come out, we will review it. We'll start reviewing the show episode by episode. We'll break it down. We'll review it, talk about what we like, if there's anything we didn't like. And, that's how the review shows generally go. But you know what? So far, I think that it's actually a really promising show. And I think it's going to be another one of those like Andor, where it's going to be a critical and fan success. At least that's my hope. And then Ronaldo comes in and says, remember when Gal Gadot was told that she was going to be Wonder Woman in the new DCU, and now we know that wasn't true? Something like that. I know.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, too, because actually one of the more concerning things to me was when they said, okay, Patty Jenkins is going to, be making this Rogue Squadron thing. And then, of course, Wonder Woman 1984 came out, and they're like, well, you know what? Let's not maybe make it right away. But then you find out she didn't even really have as much to do with the original Wonder Woman movie as we had once thought. She more or less inherited, like a lot of the work was done for her when she took that over. So now I understand Lucasfilm's skepticism about handing that over, but I don't know. that's another one that I think is really promising because it almost sounds like the Star Wars version of Top Gun.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that would be awesome. That would be incredible to watch. All right, but hey, like I said, we will let you guys know along the way if, because there's all kinds of weird things that are coming out. Like I've been sending things out, I know to you, you've been doing it to me. I mean, there's like little nuggets that have been coming out as far as Star Wars news goes. So I think we're running into another weird Star Wars news cycle where you're going to start seeing these weird things, some shocking, some maybe not so surprising coming out. So it's going to be really interesting. Ronaldo says that might happen to Daisy Ridley. That's why I don't trust her 100%. Rey being a really important character and the fact that Daisy was ready and willing to return, I think it will get made at some point. Like I said at the top of the show, or one of them, either part 1 or 2. I said at the top of one of them, I said I think that it'll be made. It just depends on when, and that this might actually be good. Maybe not so much a reflection that's positive within Lucasfilm, because this never should have happened. And like you said at the top, like, look, this is getting to be inexcusable here. I mean, you're really dropping the ball. You're doing all kinds of things. You're switching out directors. I mean, there's just like a lot of mayhem going on over there at Lucasfilm. But I will say this. Most of the time they would soldier on and just put an inferior product out in order to make a deadline or to meet some schedule. I'm hoping that this is a good sign that, hey, you know what? This is starting to unravel a little bit. Let's pull back. Let's regroup. Let's take it off the schedule. Let's come back and make sure that we can do this correctly and then put it on the schedule. And apparently, I think in the same article, they said that the 2027 movie was still on or something like that. I think I read something to that effect. So we'll have to see. Because we don't even know what projects. We know the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. We pretty much figured that the Rey movie was in December. But I don't think that's ever been officially confirmed.
Well, yeah, we still got that. There's still the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi film.
Mm-hmm.
Lando.
Which is a movie now. Yeah. It was a series, now it's a movie. Yep.
So, yeah, it's a bunch of different projects that we got to see. Are things going to move things up the timeline? Things are going to get shoved back. Time will tell.
Time will tell. But at least in, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, we have Skeleton Crew to look forward to. So, hopefully that ends up being as good as what it looks like from the trailers. And again, if you guys missed our reaction to the trailer, it was like literally, I think, the last show that we did. I think it was last Monday's show or something. So go ahead and catch up on that. That was actually a pretty fun episode, I remember. All right. Oh, and then Ronaldo says, maybe she doesn't know she's out. Well, that's possible. There's been a lot of people in Lucasfilm, in the Star Wars family, that were blindsided, where, it's like they're fired and they find out by reading a press release like everybody else, right? So that's not good. Mm-hmm. But all right, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Like I said, anything new comes out about Rey in this movie, we'll let you guys know. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already. As you know, it helps the algorithm. Watch for some YouTube shorts that I'm going to start doing, where I'm going to do like some live action character breakdowns. That should be fun. We'll either be back live tomorrow or we won't be live till next Sunday. But like I said, the next one's going to be Andor Season 2 updates, because there has been enough things that have been announced that I think it's worth doing another show and discussing it with you guys. We'll probably put a poll up about what we talked about tonight, so watch for that. And until then, yeah, I'm Eric Vansel. Almost forgot what to do.
Darryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
There it is.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.